Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, it's milestones and murder. Murder, She Wrote, that is. As a kid growing up in the 80s, it was appointment TV on Sunday nights to see just how Jessica Fletcher would stumble on and solve another murder. So it's only fitting that award-winning author Terrie Farley Moran would join me for episode 100. Not only is she a fellow lover of all things Murder, She Wrote, but she's just published her third entry in the Venerable series, Killer on the Court, which is the 55th overall if you're keeping count. Here, Jessica Fletcher heads to Rockaway Beach in Queens, New York, where she's supposed to be enjoying some fun in the sun with her nephew Grady, his wife Donna, and their son Frank. But when Donna's boss turns up dead, his body pummeled by tennis balls, Jessica is determined to find his killer and serve up some justice. Terrie also co-authors the Scrapbooking Mysteries with Laura Childs and writes the Read 'em and Eat Cozy series. The first installment in that saga, Well Read Then Dead, won the Agatha Award for Best First Novel. Additionally, she has written short stories that have been included in anthologies and published in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine and Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. Terrie's other contributions to the Murder, She Wrote series include Killing in a Koi Pond and Debonair in Death. Kirkus gave Killer on the Court a rave review, noting, "A unique murder method and welcome local color makes this one of Jessica's best adventures yet." Now, grab yourself a celebratory drink, tea's fine, and get cozy as Terrie Farley Moran shares the unlikely yet poetic story of how she became a contributor to the Murder, She Wrote book series. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. Today is actually milestone episode 100, if you can believe it. I don't know how that happened. I realized it today. And so then I put on my shirt with little cocktail glasses because that's the only celebrating I'm doing. But I am thrilled to be in conversation with award-winning author Terrie Farley Moran, who is the collaborator with Jessica Fletcher on the Murder, She Wrote books. I believe this is number 55, if you can believe that, Killer on the Court, which just came out. Welcome to the show, Terrie. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very, very happy to be here, and I'm always happy to talk about Jessica.
Isn't she great? You know, I was just thinking it's kind of appropriate, even though this was just the world's way of working, that you were here for episode 100, because I don't think that I would be the man of mystery that I am if it wasn't for Murder, She Wrote and Jessica Fletcher and probably Nancy Drew and Agatha Christie. But I think my real love of mystery started with the Murder, She Wrote shows. And I know that you have an affinity, for that program as well. So I'm wondering, before we talk about Killer on the Court specifically, if you wouldn't mind just telling us how you came about this unique writing gig and what your relationship was to Murder, She Wrote and Jessica Fletcher prior to actually writing these books.
All right, this is really interesting. At least it was to me. We went into quarantine for the pandemic on the 14th or 15th, that weekend of March. St. Patrick's Day is March 17th, and in my world, that's the high holy day. But here I am in my house by myself, baking soda bread, playing Irish music. There's no parades, there's no grandkids around, there's no parties, there's nothing. And nothing stops me. So I'm singing and dancing to all the music, and my phone rings. And I pick it up and I go, "Happy St. Patrick's Day." And a nice lady says, "Hi, Terrie, it's Kim." I had no idea who Kim was. It's my agent. But I was thinking, I was getting St. Patrick's Day calls, So I said, "Oh." And she said, "Kim Lionetti." And I said, oh, Kim, I'm sorry. I was, in St. Patrick's Day mode. So she said to me, "Well, a job offer fell into our laps, but I'm not sure if you'd be interested, because some job offers have fallen into our laps and we've taken them, and some we haven't." So I said, "Oh, what is it?" And she said, "Do you know the Murder, She Wrote books?" And I said, "I'll do it." And she said, "Wait a minute," because she's an agent and they're responsible people as opposed to the emotional writer people. And she was like, "Don't you want to talk about the terms and what they want and how it needs to be done and, money?" I was like, no, I'll do it. I said, "You have to understand, I love Murder, She Wrote." And I told her the story, which is true. When my kids were little, in the 80s, you used to have to, well, we didn't have to, but we used to go to my mother's house every Sunday. My mother still lived in the Bronx. We lived in Queens. So there was a bridge involved, unless we swam across the bay. So at 6:30, I would start, come on, pack your toys up, clean everything, we have to go. And my husband, who was the calmest man in America, would always be like, we have plenty of time. And I'd say, no, we don't. There could be traffic on the bridge. I don't want to miss the beginning, because it was 1984 when the show started. It was my all-time favorite show. And the problem was no DVRs.
Right.
If you missed an episode, or if I missed the beginning, then I didn't want to see the end till I saw the beginning. Right. You had to wait till the summer and hope that that episode made the reruns. Otherwise, you could go years and be missing an episode. It's not like now.
Right.
So that was my first relationship with the shows. I was addicted to the shows. I watched them every Sunday night. I was happiest girl in the world. My husband actually went out and bought some pre-DVR thing that came with a string that attached, so I wouldn't get crazy. So that, we could have normal family Sundays like other people. And then they moved to the Thursday night for the last session. And by then, there were already a few books. Right. There was the first 4 books that came out based on the series. I forget who wrote them. And then Dawn started writing books in the late 80s, early 90s. So I was also reading the books. How, why, no one knew this. This wasn't like, it's not like I went into Penguin Random House every Sunday or Monday and announced, by the way, folks, I love Murder, She Wrote if it ever comes up. They could have asked 40 people. They could have drawn my name out of a hat. Right. I have no idea. I can guess that there were a couple of factors. And one is I had a long history at Berkeley. Right. I had written my own books. I also had co-written with Laura Childs. And that lets you kind of know that I'm capable of writing characters I didn't invent.
Right.
So I think that those were, some factors. And as I say, they could have asked 20 people. They were also in trouble because they were making this decision as we went into pandemic mode. Right. And people weren't focused. I didn't have to be focused. You said Murder, She Wrote. I said, okay.
Yeah.
I'm in. So that's how it happened. It was lucky for me. If it had been another series, I might have said no. Right. Particularly because the terms of these contracts require 2 books a year, which is a lot. I was used to writing something of my own and something with Laura. And when you write with another person, it's not as personally time consuming because, she does this, I do. It's Laura's series. She has to worry about, do we want to kill this guy or not? I don't have to worry about that. So that's how it came to be. I have no idea why. I am forever grateful. And I'll be honest with you, I never asked.
That's amazing.
I didn't want to ask because, I don't care. It happened and I was fortunate, but it was complete and total on my part. I thought complete luck. And on their part, I don't know how many people they asked or who had commitments and couldn't do it. I have no illusions that I am the only one that could do this. But I think there were, it was, for them, I was a known quantity. Right. I'm not the only known quantity, but I was a known quantity. They knew I could deliver.
Sure.
So I was probably on a list of, X number of people. And when they got to me, I was the first one to raise my hand and go, yes, I'll do it. But, as I say, it's a grueling thing because Laura and I have been trying to schedule another book together. And between her writing 2 books a year and me writing 2 books a year, it just doesn't seem to work. We can't seem to find a time for the 2 of us. But, I am very happy with the Murder, She Wrote series. So that's the long version of how it came to be made.
That is such a wonderful story, though, and how it all sort of coalesced on your, celebratory day of St. Patrick's Day. That's amazing.
That was my St. Patrick's Day treat. I was no longer annoyed that I didn't have a parade.
Right? Meant to be. I mean, life takes away one celebration and gives you another one.
Wow, that keeps on giving.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just to your point too, I remember watching Murder, She Wrote when it originally aired, and it was appointment television because you had to be there or you missed it. And then I remember when I was, much younger and VHS was a thing, that I belonged to a club, and, once a month they would send you an episode and they were all sort of out of order. But really, that was the only way you could watch it. Whereas now you can watch it digitally, you can stream it, you can buy the box set. I've done all of those things.
Yep.
But, anyway, that's such a great story. And it's so nice to see somebody who's really a fan of the show and of the books, and then it sort of falls into your lap. That's kind of kismet.
Spooky.
Spooky in the best possible way.
Yes.
All right. So I have to ask you, of course, about Killer on the Court, which is the brand new entry in the series. So I wanted to ask you, what brings Jessica to the Rockaways here, and what mysterious death and case does she find herself involved with once she reaches her destination?
Okay. What brings her to the Rockaways is, in theory, a vacation with her nephew Grady, his wife Donna, and their son Frank. But what really brought her to the Rockaways in my mind was because when she goes to visit Grady and Donna, which she, has done in the past, it's always Manhattan.
Right.
And there's a lot more to New York City than Manhattan. Well, I'm going to divert, which I usually do because I can't apparently speak in straight sentences. When you look at all of the places she's been, both on TV and in the books, and the books and the TV shows are completely separate entities.
Right.
But if you look at all the places that she's been to, one of the reasons in the first book that I wrote, I sent her to South Carolina, was because A, she hadn't been there before, but B, she had just been in Cabot Cove for several books. Right. And the readers like traveling with her. They like her being in different places. I like her being in different places. So I made the decision that the next time I brought her back to New York, I wanted to bring her to someplace that wasn't Manhattan.
Sure.
And the beach seemed to be, a beach vacation seemed to be the perfect thing. So what happened was Donna, who is also an accountant, as is Grady, Donna got a reward of a month in this beach colony, which it's Rockaway Beach. I mean, there's bungalows everywhere.
Right.
And she got a month in the bungalow, and they invited Jessica to come down and stay with them for a while. And Jessica had just handed in a book. So once you hand in the book, I usually have to clean my house. Apparently, Jessica is Mrs. Neat. She doesn't have to do that. So she was able to go and spend some time at the beach. And unfortunately, she met some of the people that are from Donna's company who also spend time at the beach, the family that runs the firm. And the big boss gets killed. And then it becomes, oh, well, and it doesn't help that it's Donna who discovers the body on the tennis court, because that gets young Frank upset. It gets everybody upset. And of course, Jessica decided to move some things and to try to see if the guy was still alive.
Right.
And the cops didn't like that. So, she didn't get off to a great start. But as it turns out, one of the cops used to work with Mort Metzger when he worked in Brooklyn. So the guy called Mort to suss out whether Jessica would be a good suspect or not. And, got the clearance from Mort to be a little more direct with Jessica. So that's kind of the beginning. There's a family drama in the sense that the Cortland family that owns the company owns all these bungalows. There's a matriarch. This is her oldest son that gets killed, which is also painful from a family viewpoint.
Right.
And there are other children and in-laws who are envious of who has which position in the company. So there's a lot of intrigue going on. And then a couple other things pop up.
Sure, as they always do.
Yes.
I have to ask you, and this is not spoilery for anybody who's like, I don't want to know details that I don't need to know. This happens very early on in the book, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about the method of murder, because it is quite unique. And I really enjoyed that, because after so many books, it has to be difficult to find an original way to kill somebody off. And yet you certainly managed to in this book.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not sure where the idea came from, because I don't play tennis. But like baseball has the machines, the pitcher machines that you stand in the cage and you can hit. Tennis has a machine. And when I was thinking of the idea of how the machine could be a weapon, and I looked them up, these machines can pitch a ball every second at up to 100 miles an hour. I mean, you get hit with one of them, even in the chest, it'll knock the wind out of you or knock you down, and you can set them on automatic. So somebody apparently got this guy to, I guess, make a tennis date with them. And when he showed up, they started the machine and it pummeled him.
Right.
And he went down and he never got up. And when they found the body, there was like dozens and dozens of balls on top of them, because the machine doesn't stop until it runs out of balls. And I don't know why. I guess I was trying to think of beach, what people do at the beach. That was one thing. And I like a unique weapon, but I fell in love with this concept because it was really, I had no idea you could kill them that easily.
Right, right.
I mean, I thought, you'd have to like drug them and, do something. No, if it was you or me and we were standing there and somebody hit that button and the ball, the first ball hit us, and you can aim. So you know where the person is going to be standing, because that's where they stand when they start. It was much easier. It was much more believable than I thought it might be when I first got the idea.
Right. How wild is that?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't play tennis. I'm sure you wouldn't want to now. And I, of course, try to resist any sports that require running. But if ever I was going to retire my, tennis racket, it would be now.
I was amazed. I just, and again, I was looking for a beach, a beach thing. Now, you could kill them surfing. Rockaway's a huge surfer beach, huge. You could have somebody hit him over the head with a surfboard, but maybe someday, but not now. This just struck me, and I don't know why. And of course, the readers all see the picture of the cover of the book, and Jessica's holding a tennis racket. Right. She never actually plays in the book, but be that as it may. But I'm glad you appreciated the weapon.
Oh yes, I mean, way to keep things fresh.
Yeah.
And something else I really, really loved about this book is, you have Jessica and you put her into this domestic situation where she is spending a lot of time with Grady and with Donna and, her grandnephew, Frank, who's named after her deceased husband. Yeah, and so it sort of opens up a whole other world for relationship dynamics and sort of a different style of storytelling. And I'm just wondering, if you can talk about putting her in that sort of domestic environment with those characters and sort of what you wanted to reveal about her personality through her interactions with young Frank and the family.
That, as I shout from the rooftops, I am a grandmother. And for all intents and purposes, Jessica is Frank's grandmother. Right. He's her nephew, but technically, the relationship is the same. And Frank has been in the books periodically. And there's been a relationship. But I wanted to have, first of all, he's now 10. We settled the age dispute because in some books, his age went up and down. He's 10. From now on, he's 10 until he's 11. This is where he is. And that is an age when you can have a huge amount of interaction with a child because their intellect is equal to mine at that age. They are into things. And as I said, my one grandson, who's now 19, he's been talking about artificial intelligence since he's 7. They know stuff. And I think it's also important, like Jess has a very strong friend background, particularly in Cabot Cove. Like when she goes around visiting, you meet a friend that she stays with or is visiting, but you don't have she doesn't have a full-time relationship with them.
Right.
Doc Hazlitt is a full-time relationship. Sheriff Metzger is a full-time relationship. These are people that she can rely on. But Donna and Grady and Frank are her real family, and she does visit often, and they have come to Cabot Cove, not as much in the books. Right. And again, I always say this, TV shows are the TV shows, the books are the books. Other than characters, they don't have a lot to do with each other. They weren't meant to, right. Especially because the books were being written as the shows were still on.
Right.
So when you look at it that way, it's not possible. It's not a continuation. People question that all the time. They think it should be, but it can't be because right. Otherwise, the show is 1984. It's, you're talking 40 years ago.
Right.
How could you possibly? Jessica Fletcher would be in the nursing home, although Angela Lansbury is doing quite well.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, I mean, she really is. So I thought that I would like to present a family portrait, which was one thing. And I also wanted to prevent, as one of my editors said to me, this is sort of like a love affair with New York City, because you see different things about New York. I can't tell you how many emails I got. What do you mean there's beaches in New York?
Right.
That's why that's why in the beginning of the book, the guys at Breakfast in Maris have the conversation about Dan Andrews and Mort Metzger talk about the fact that there are all these other beaches. Rockaway's the big one because it's it's all ocean, and right. It's very, very big and long. And you can enter it from several boroughs and Nassau County. But that was really, my thing. I wanted a family atmosphere. I wanted to show that their relationships were all still solid. I hope to bring them back again, not right away, but as a stable.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's how it happened. There was a plan. I always shock myself because I'm a by the seat of my pants writer. So right. The fact that a plan emerges is always amazing to me.
I love that. But I have to say, as such a fan of the series and of the books, I really, again, appreciated what you did with that family dynamic, because even though we've met these characters before, I don't think I ever felt, that they were fleshed out or that we were ever that invested in them, that we knew them that well. And I think that they just have taken on new texture and nuance, and it's almost like meeting them again for the first time and just on a much deeper level. And it's really nice that 50 plus books into a series, you can still discover new things and come away saying, wow, that was fresh and deep, and I like that.
Appreciate it.
So kudos to you. I love that. And I wanted to ask you too, as a reader, I always love, when there are characters in books who also enjoy reading and you sort of learn about what they're reading. So we hear about, the books that Frank is reading, and Jessica herself is reading a Charles Todd book. And I just wondered if that's a reflection, of your reading taste, because I have to say, I read my first Charles Todd book earlier this year. It was A Game of Fear. It blew my mind. It was so good. And I wondered, where I've been for the 25 or 26 other books.
That happens all the time. Yeah. Charles and Carolyn Todd, Carolyn recently passed away, but they have written some of the Rutledge books. I mean, they have several different series, and the books are interesting, and they're in a time frame that interests me.
Right.
Like, World War One, after, in the aftermath of the war. Part of that is because my grandfathers fought in World War One. There are stories within the family of the results of that war on the family. So that time frame always I'm intrigued by several periods of time. Pre-Revolutionary War to the War of 1812 is a big one for me. First World War is a big one. Second World War is a big. There's different periods of time. So that, I think, is why I read that. This is actually funny on Frank's books. What I did was, my grandchildren, I have 7 grandchildren. I would say 4 of them are big readers. So my grandson Shane, who is now 13, was very, very into those books by Nathan Hale, which is actually Nathan Hale is the writer's name, Hazardous, whatever it is. And I went back and looked at what books I had bought for Shane when he was about Frank's age. Like, what did I buy for him, 3 years ago, I guess. And I had a star next to Lafayette. So obviously that was one of Shane's favorites. So now it became one of Frank's favorites, because otherwise I go to the library and I go to the children's section and I look. This was easier. And I did have a boy that age who was a big reader. Well, it turns out, although I've been to Florence's Tavern a number of times, when people come to New York, where do you bring them for lunch? You bring them to Florence's Tavern, then they can see the Statue of Liberty. It's like a whole thing. I never knew that the bust of Lafayette was in Florence's Tavern until I was researching it for Jessica's lunch. And then I was like, look at this. I happened to pick, because if I hadn't picked Lafayette, I think I would have dumped whoever I picked and put Lafayette in so I could have the bust of Lafayette there. I also, as a reader, I like reading about what other people are reading. I like knowing about what other people are reading. So that's kind of where these books came from in my mind.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. I love that you get the reading aspect. I love with Jessica's character that you get some, insights into her writing process and what it's like to be on deadline. Or in the last book, she had to come up with a synopsis and was struggling to do with that. I just love you get the, sort of the reality check from the writer, because there's also a world that exists outside of these books that brings them into being.
And that's very important to me, because she is a writer. This is what she's supposed to be doing. She can't go flitting around if she's got a synopsis due. And we all have a synopsis due, because until the editor okays the synopsis, technically you shouldn't be writing the book, although I usually am. But, because they're going to have questions and they're going to say, what would I do if I handed in a synopsis of a book and someone else had handed in a very similar synopsis the week before? Now I'm dead meat. I mean, that has never happened to me, but I don't know that it's ever happened to anybody, but these are the things that keep me up at night. And I'm sure that would keep Jessica up at night. So you want to get your work done. The other thing is, if she doesn't have work to do, then she's not under pressure. And if she's not under pressure, how really inconvenient is this murder? Whatever murder it is.
Right.
It has to create some chaos for her, because otherwise, she could just sit down and say, nah, I think I'll have a beer, Mort, you handle this one. That's no fun. Terrific. She's got to be under pressure.
Sure. So I guess synopsis is the dirty S word for the evening. But I'm going to throw another S word at you. And we talked a little bit about it already. Setting. So as you mentioned, the books, tend to alternate between, you might have a couple in Cabot Cove, and then, Jessica not only explores the states, but she sort of explores the world as well. And I think that that's probably a really good way to keep the series fresh, by going to new places. And really how many bodies can drop in quaint, charming little Cabot Cove. But I'm wondering if you can talk about, Jessica's travels and, like I mentioned, how that does help to keep the series fresh. And then if you, as a reader and now the writer of these books, have a preference. I know that some people prefer Cabot Cove just because it's the familiarity and we all like the quaintness of that setting. But what say you? Would you rather be in Cabot Cove, or would you rather be traveling with Jessica, or a combination of both?
Okay. As a viewer of the TV shows that I keep saying have nothing to do with the books, as a viewer, I am in the Team Cabot Cove. I am one of the people who was always thrilled when I would see in the opening credits that Seth was in it, or, Mort, or Sheriff Tucker. What was his name? Amos Tucker.
Oh, Amos Tupper?
Tupper. Okay, Sheriff Tucker. When you would see their names in the cast,
Right.
you would know right away that she was staying in Cabot Cove. But the intrigue that you can get from her being in other places, and as you say, Cabot Cove, they show you the sign in the beginning. There's 3,000 people living in Cabot Cove. By the end of season 4, 90% of them would be dead. So she's got to go someplace else. As a writer, I've written so far one book in Cabot Cove, and I'm going to write the one I'm working on a synopsis for now is going to be set in Cabot Cove, hopefully. I like the Cabot Cove camaraderie.
Right.
I like the geography and the introduction of different people when she's not in Cabot Cove. I mean, different people come to Cabot Cove too, but I mean, I wrote a book where Michael Haggerty came to Cabot Cove. Who would expect that? Even I wasn't. I was like, what the heck is he doing there? But, that happened. So I could do both. I would not like to write like 4 books in the same place.
Right.
Or, like you could have her go to California and then travel to Oregon to visit another friend, like keep her on the West Coast for a while. I don't like that. I like, in my world, in between books, she's doing something else. We're not jumping from book to book. She's wherever she is. She was in South Carolina, then she was in Cabot Cove, now she's in New York. She's got to move around, and that gives you and me the interest of what's doing. So I like the difference in geography. And I will say I did get a letter from a woman who complained about the South Carolina book because I didn't use the geography enough. Now, I'm not sure how much geography I should have put in there. And she wasn't even from South Carolina. Another woman sent me an email about some food I should have put in that I didn't. So, everybody's very nice about it, and I like learning, so it's all great. But we're all used to Jessica being a very independent person that goes, you call her today and tell her you need her help because you whatever, and she charters a plane or whatever she does, and off she goes. So she's very independent, and I like that about her, and that's why I don't like to keep her in one place.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. And I have to say, I agree with you. In the television shows, I always preferred, when she was in Cabot Cove visually, I guess that aesthetic was more pleasing to me. I don't know. But again, the older I get, with a book like Killer on the Court, as much as I love and crave being in Cabot Cove, I love that we can travel vicariously with Jessica. I think that's probably my preferred way to travel. And, I'm not a big beach person. My wife's family, if they're watching, they're shuddering because they're all beach people. But I would rather read a book like this about the beach in an air-conditioned room and that's how I travel there.
Yeah.
So, just to speak to that point. But I did want to ask you, and I promise we'll move away from Jessica soon because you do write other things. But,
that's right.
Sort of such a beloved, iconic character, and readers are really invested in her. But beyond being a character, she's actually also a property, of Universal. And so there are a lot of eyes on her and what can and can't happen in a book. So can you talk about, the challenges of writing such a well-known character that people are really invested in and really sort of have to, I don't know, I don't want to say put shackles on, but you can only take so many liberties with Jessica Fletcher.
Absolutely. And that is something that most readers don't realize. I'll be honest with you. I only know what I'm not allowed to do by rumor, like stuff that Dawn said, I mean, things that happened before me. Nobody has told me, you can't do this or you can't do that. One of the big things, and I hesitated to mention this for a couple of years, but I'm talking about it now because it came up I went to Malice Domestic and it came up at Malice. She is not to get romantically involved.
Right.
And that was a major issue because Dawn started the character of George Sutherland with the idea that he would become a romantic partner for Jessica. And he's been hanging around for years, and people argue on Facebook all the time. But Dawn has said, and I have it in writing, and there were people who were in the room that absolutely not. Now, he never dropped to the character.
Right.
But there are arguments among readers. I mean, I'm going to get, I don't think there was any George Sutherland in this book. Every time there's no George Sutherland in this book, then I get emails, where is George? In one book, I had her and George have a phone conversation. Right. What good was that? There is a group that is looking for this big romance that is never going to happen because Universal, I will tell you this, not this book, the book before this, is now going to, that one, yes.
Oh, there it is.
Debonair and Death. Debonair is going to come out in large print soon. So somebody sent me the breakdown of the large print to read and see if it was all right. And then the editor sent it back and said, no, you don't do that for the large print, because I do it for the paper. I did it for the paperback and the hardcover. Universal does it for the large print.
Oh, interesting.
So I said, okay, I don't have to sit here and go, because for this, you got to go line by line. This is going to the printer. So, did I spell everything right? 500 people have already read it and we don't know if we have an error. And those go to Universal. Contracts between Penguin Random House and Universal are being negotiated all the time. There's like stuff that has nothing to do with me. But I do know that if I make a false step, there is someone at Universal who will see it and say, tell her don't do that. Now, so far, nobody has said, tell her don't do that.
Right.
But it could happen at any moment in time. And you have to be aware that this is someone else's property. It's like if I'm staying in your house for a week. If I break a dish, I have to replace it. I can't just say, oh, I think while they're gone, I'll paint the walls green. You can't do it, and that is difficult for the readers because they think they get an idea, and the writer, and people are very nice about suggesting a lot of things, locations particularly, and, I'm very happy to have them because I'll never run out.
Right.
But when I get the conversations about George, and I've hesitated to tell people this until I actually went back and looked at how many times George should have gone away or been distanced in some way once Dawn knew the romance he was planning could not happen. I mean, I'm not, he was Dawn's character. I'm not criticizing, but it just led people to believe that someday, and in the cozy field, we know you can have flirtation, but you can only carry for so long, and eventually it has to be something, or the guy's got to get transferred to Georgia or someplace. You can't do that. It's not fair to the reader. So more and more I'm getting ready. And once I said it at Malice, I thought from now on, the next time I get one of these emails, I'm going to say, I'm not allowed to do it. And on the other hand, you have to worry not that I worry, I wonder how many people in Universal and how many people in Penguin Random House were actually involved with this process when it first started.
Right.
I mean, it's Berkley is the division now. It was several other divisions of different places through the years. So everybody's following what the lawyers have been doing for forever, I guess. But there are rules, and you are right. There are rules.
Oh my goodness, there sure are, and it always surprises people. But yes, Jessica Fletcher, there's a lot on the line with that character. And I wasn't going to ask, but let me ask too, because you've mentioned Don Baen a couple of times, and people I think know that he wrote the first, I want to say 45, 46 Murder She Wrote books, sometimes in collaboration with his daughter, more often with his wife Renee Paley Baen towards the end. They wrote a lot of books together. And he, wonderful guy. He was actually living in Connecticut. And so I had the real good fortune of just meeting him at sort of a small local writers conference, and we became friendly. And it was wild because I'd read his books, for decades. And then here's the man who is larger than life, both in stature and sort of presence. But such lovely people, they would have us to their home for dinner, take us out for drinks, and they were just lovely. And I'm assuming that you probably, got to know him a bit because you've been in the business for a while too. So I'm just wondering if, you wanted to speak to that at all, or sort of Don's legacy.
Yes. I was fortunate enough to meet Don and Renee at Malice Domestic, one of my first ones. Molly McRae is friendly with them. And we were all at the same table at the Edgar banquet, and Renee and I were the two vegetarian dishes. Although I'm not a vegetarian, but I tend at conferences to order vegetarian. But you're right, a lovely couple, perfect, he's a perfect gentleman, she's a sweetheart. They act like they know you their whole life after 5 minutes. I really enjoyed their company. Never in my wildest did I ever think that someday I would, pick up a series that he had written, because, this is not the only work he ever did. He's done quite a bit. But I have to agree with you. He's a total gentleman, gracious to the point of, I don't believe I was published when I met him, but it didn't matter. Like, there are people who, when you meet them, they'll say, all right, so who are you with? Meaning, who's your publishing house? That is like, I wouldn't ask you who your publishing house. I don't care. I'm not, this has got nothing to do with me. He treats everybody like he's delighted to meet you. He's genuinely warm, as is Renee. They were a very, very warm couple. I never spoke about them to them about work. I did see them at one other conference where we had a cup of tea together. Well, I had tea. I don't know what they had. I can't speak for them, but I had tea. And it was just like, oh, I remember you kind of thing, for 20 minutes between panels. So that was the only time the 2 times I met them. But they were lovely, gracious people the whole time. And I did tell him I was a big fan of the Murder She Wrote, and also of what is the one he wrote with Truman's daughter? Not really, but he wrote
the Margaret Truman.
Margaret Truman books, yes. Harry Truman is my second favorite president. My favorite president is John Adams. Don't ask. I'll ramble for hours. So I always read the Margaret Truman book. So I was a big fan of Don's, a big fan. And you're right, carrying his legacy forward is an honor. I can't say it's a burden, but it's a heavy responsibility. Sure. You can't, I don't want to be the one that messes up the Murder She Wrote series when Dawn carried it for so long.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing those remembrances of him, because he was just larger than life, but he was always the big writer in the room, and he made you feel like you were the somebody.
Yes.
I have done nothing. I write book reviews, and you're trying to.
I'm just here. You're important. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's so funny. But let me ask you too, and I guess this sort of goes hand in hand, but I wanted to sort of move into more broad territory, and I won't keep you all here all night, but I should have realized once we start talking Murder, She Wrote, this could go on forever because we're both
Forever,
so
yeah.
interested. But I wanted to ask you about writing cozies, because you've written darker things too, I think particularly in short stories, but
Yes.
cozies do come, with a set of confines. And I remember even Don said once, and I think the book was Domestic Malice, which was a take on the Malice
Yes.
Domestic Conference. And there were some things in that book that they got some flack for because it's things that aren't usually done in a cozy. And he said until he'd written and published that book, he
Yes.
didn't know that he was writing a cozy until he broke some rules and people called them out. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the confines of the cozy and whether you find that a challenge or more of sort of a creative inspiration, in that you have to find, more creative ways to think outside of that box.
Okay, I write what I read. I have been a cozy reader. In my opinion, the cozies are, you remember the golden age writers like Christie, Mary Roberts Reinhardt? Those were kind of cozy. Somebody died. They may have had a little more blood and gore than we do in cozies. But there's not gratuitous violence. There's no sex. There's like all the things that we don't do in cozies. So when I left them, like by the time I was maybe 15, 16, I had read. I'm a very lucky girl. My parents were readers, and we had an actual bookcase. Nothing in the bookcase was new. Everything in the bookcase was secondhand. The bookcase was secondhand.
Right.
But we had a bookcase, and the rule in my house was if the book was in the house, you were allowed to read it regardless of your age.
Love it.
So I read all these mysteries. As an aside, I will tell you I fell in love with Thomas Paine when I was 14 because Howard Fast, I think, was the guy. Guy wrote a book called Citizen Tom Paine. And it was all about Thomas Paine's life, but fictionally, but enough of the truth. And I think that really pushed my interest in American history because my father was an American history person. But I moved then to like Mrs. Polifax and those kinds of, I guess they were pre-cozies, because I don't think we started calling things cozies till like the 80s or the 90s. Right. But there were a whole bunch of mysteries. John Thatcher, the banker. My first job, I was an assistant to the trust department in a bank, and I couldn't imagine any of my vice presidents being nearly smart enough to do what John Thatcher could do with a mystery, So I always lean towards those kinds of mysteries. I can read the others, thrillers, suspense, but the violence, 9 dead bodies in in 5 chapters, it bothers me. Sure. I could get nightmares from that. So I stay with what I write. Now, having said all of that, every time I say that, my daughter says to me, "Ma, you put a woman in a car and set her on fire." And I say, that was a short story. Short stories are completely different. Yeah. When I was in the 8th grade, my aunt gave me a subscription to Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. And I've had a subscription to Ellery Queen ever since. And when I was about 20, I picked up a subscription to Hitchcock. So I have a broader scope in short stories in terms of reading. So I have a broader scope in terms of writing. I think I've only written 1 cozy short story. And to be honest, I didn't know if it would get published, but it just struck me. Sure. And it did. Hitchcock published it, and I can't remember the name, but it made the cover. It had flamingo. That's all I remember is the flamingo. Yeah, but that I write what I read, and in books I tend to cozy. I can do stuff like we were talking about before with I just assume if it's Anne Cleeves, I'm going to love it, so I can read that. And with the short stories, because the other thing is, if I write like the story where I set the woman on fire in the car, she deserved it, I will say. They're short. So I don't have to get involved in all of the angst of carrying on that kind of violence for 250, 300 pages.
Right.
It's, 22 pages or something. So I can do it, but only for a little bit of time. So that is the difference. But cozies are my first love in terms of books. If I really, really, really was the greatest writer in the world, I would be Doris Kearns Goodwin and write nothing but American history. But I'm not, so I can't, so I don't. So that's where, where I am. But I still cozies all the time. It's my favorite. If you say, like before we were talking, I said MC Beaton. Now she's got a new book out and I haven't read it yet. And this is driving me out of my mind. Yes. And I just haven't had a chance. Criminal Element came out today. And the first thing I noticed was that Doreen Sheridan did a review of a book and is making chia pudding. Ooh. Is the recipe, and I make chia pudding.
Oh my God.
Her recipe is different than my recipe. So like, I got to get rid of you later. I'm going to go right into the kitchen and make her chia pudding. Oh, I don't have mangoes, but I have peaches. So I can use peaches to make her chia pudding. But I mean, it's because Emmeline, I forget the woman's name. I actually was on a panel with her. Her real name is something else. This is why I get confused. People, you have to write with your own name or I don't know who you are. But the book that she was reviewing, this was the only food recipe. The rest of the recipes were for drinks. Okay. So Doreen picked this out. So I'm like so excited. And I'm like, oh, John's going to be here in a few minutes. I'll have to wait and do this, But this is, how cozies go. You feel part of it. It's always part of it. And I do get Dawn's point because Jessica Fletcher almost appears to be more of a procedural than a cozy, but she hits all the markers for a cozy. There's no bad language, there's no gratuitous sex, there's no violence, bloody bodies. And people have complained, like you say, about the Malice Domestic book, Domestic Malice. That was about domestic violence, and people did not take it well. And there were parts of it that were hard to read. When I read it the first time, I was like, where was he going? I mean, it's an important issue,
right?
But for cozy readers, it was difficult.
Right. And it's so funny because there's such a fine line sometimes between what is cozy and what is traditional. And I think it confuses all of us, even people who write them. But I kind of love, too, that, with the short stories, you can get that darkness out of your system. I feel sort of the same way, is more of a reader than a writer. I read all across the spectrum, but if I read something really, really dark, then I gravitate towards something a little bit lighter, and then I feel like I've achieved some kind of balance again.
That's the glory of books.
Isn't it? It's the greatest thing, like the greatest.
You could do whatever you want, whichever way you want to go, you can do it.
Absolutely. And now that I know that pudding is on the line and I am keeping you from pudding, I only have 2 more questions, and I'm sure that they will be shorter. But I ask everybody who sits down here, because there are always people, out there who sort of have creative instincts and just haven't embraced them yet, and maybe don't have the confidence to do so. So in terms of a creative or a writing life, what is the best advice that you were ever given, and then the best advice that you were never given and had to learn for yourself throughout the process of actually doing the work?
Okay, the best advice I was ever given was from a writer named Jeremiah Healy, who is no longer with us. I wrote my first novel, the one that's still in the bottom drawer that nobody ever wanted to buy. Most people didn't even want to read. I wrote it, and when I finished the first draft, I happened to be in Florida visiting my daughter, and I was like, all right, I finished the first draft, what do I do? So I went to the computer and I Googled first draft mystery, and it came up that Sleuthfest was being held 2 weeks in the future, about 10 miles away. So I said, oh, I'll go to this conference. What do I know? So I call up the phone number. I get some nice woman who sells me like the last ticket. And I go to the conference, and they had a panel for beginning writers. And Jeremiah Healy gave the panel. And Jerry was an attorney and a professor, and he wrote great mysteries, and he was very personable. And he said, if you really want to be a mystery writer, I can tell you, join Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America. Do not wait until you are published. You will learn more from the people you meet. Like, I'm an introvert.
Right.
It would never have occurred to me, go to a meeting, see people and tell them, oh, I'm a wannabe. It never dawned on me. But you get newsletters, you get announcements, you get all this stuff. So the best advice I ever got as a mystery writer, and I never wrote anything but mysteries, was join Sisters in Crime, join Mystery Writers of America, because that's where you find out what's going on in the field.
Right.
The best advice I ever taught myself was, writing is a job. Publishing is a business. If you don't, you can't say, I'm not feeling it today.
Right.
You got to feel it, because it's got to be on an editor's desk in 27 more days. And you still have to write, 9,000 words or 30,000 or whatever you owe them. You've got to do it. If you look at it as a job and as a business, you will understand why things happen the way they do. When you get dumped, or something you think is wonderful and an editor thinks it isn't, it's not personal. It's not about you.
Right.
It's because this is what the industry requires at the moment. It's very, very important that, when I worked in the real world, as I call it, I could get up and not go to work in the morning and say, I just don't feel like doing it today. But I have to pay for that. I have to take a sick day or a vacation day or something. And writing is just like that. If I get up and say I don't feel like, I work every day, at least 6 days a week. If I get up today and decide, oh, I think I'd rather wash the kitchen floor, I'm going to have to pay for that.
Right.
By putting time in maybe in the evening or something. The work has to be done. And if you look at it like it's creative and I have to wait till I'm inspired, no, I at least not for me. For me, it's a job. I have to do it. If I'm not inspired, I'll just sit here with my cup of tea and the next cup of tea, and then switch over to coffee because I need the caffeine until I get, some words on the page.
Sure.
That's like the best advice and I figured that out all by myself, so I was kind of happy.
Don't you? And a point well taken, because how many people wake up in the morning feeling their job? But like you said, it's got to be done, or there are consequences and repercussions, if it's not. So I will get to my final question for you in a quick moment, but I just realized I've been remiss because, we've talked about your contributions to the Murder, She Wrote books, and certainly Donald Baen and his families. But I think a lot of readers know too that there was sort of an interim after Don passed, and John Land wrote 6 books as well. And I know John really well. He's a great author, writes like fantastic thrillers. And what I enjoyed about those books is they were what I would call, I guess, the cutting edge of cozy. There were cozy elements, there were thriller elements, they were a little bit more action oriented. And I think in some ways they sort of encompass the tone of the TV show more so than the earlier books. So if people, haven't read those books yet and you're sort of looking for cutting edge Jessica Fletcher,
they're there.
check those out. Yeah. And it's funny that you would mention the Margaret Truman books, because I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but John Land actually has taken over those, and those are totally
so happy. He's perfect.
Yeah, right.
He will be so perfect for those books. He is absolutely perfect. I was thrilled because they haven't been around.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought they were dead.
Right.
So it was a question of them finding him and him finding them. And he's very well suited to that. And he's going to be really, really good at that. I agree. he did give much more of an edge to Jessica. And he also did, as you say, and it did cause some difficulty, go back to the TV show in terms of characters. One of the things that Dawn did during his 46 or 47 books was he changed everybody.
Right.
I mean, he kept Seth and Mort. He, I think, once mentioned Loretta when Jessica got stuck on a boat some time and somebody rescued her and Loretta was on the pier. But it was very difficult to look at this and adjust it back, because what would happen, for example, he brought Adele back as Mort's wife, which was fine, except for the 8 million people who knew Maureen.
Right.
And that was, so what I did in this book, the Beach Book, what I did originally, I never mentioned Mort's wife. When Jessica was in Cabot Cove in Debonair, Mort mentions his wife. He doesn't mention her name, I don't think. In this book, he mentions Maureen. And then Vinny the cop in Rockaway, who used to work with Mort, when he calls Mort to check on Jessica, and then he talks to Jessica, he says, I was shocked to hear that Adele, to try to cut. It's the same thing with the boy's age. Dawn and John had the kid at 2 different ages, and it was reversed. So, that had to be, those are things. And I'm going to, do stuff like that too. It's just, John had much more of an interest in TV. I mean, it would not have surprised me if he couldn't have figured out a way to have some TV relationship again with this series. And I don't have that same vision.
Right.
My vision is that the TV show is the TV show, as I keep saying, and the books are the books. Right. And you have to follow when Dawn changes a person. My personal favorite mayor was the one on the television show with the dog, Winston the dog. If I could bring back anybody on the show, I'd bring back Winston the dog. But I can't bring back Winston the dog because Jim Shelvin is now the mayor of Cabot Cove, and he don't have a dog named Winston. I may give him a dog someday, but I loved Winston. Every time the mayor be out there walking his dog, I'd be the happiest girl on the couch, yay, this is great. So it's, in a series this long with multiple authors, you're going to find things, and there's always going to be something that irritates a reader and something that really pleases a reader. And we all just have to live with that.
Yeah, true. And it's funny because, you mentioned that, the TV series exists in its own world and the books do. And then you find all this weird intermingling. And then even though you don't want to, you sort of have to, go back and rectify some things that have gone amiss along the way. And I promise this will be my last aside before my final question to you, so you can get to that pudding. But it's funny that you mentioned, you wouldn't have been surprised if John Land, sort of found a way to try to revitalize the TV series. When he wrote the 50th book, which I think was A Time for Murder, it was the first book that really went back in time. So there was a current storyline and a past storyline.
Jessica, when she was a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, Jessica was a teacher, and he said that what he was hoping would come from that is like maybe they would revitalize the show, but then Angela Lansbury would only be needed, to sort of introduce and close out the episodes, and then you would have younger characters, who played the teacher, Jessica Fletcher, in her 20s, 30s, and it's like, wow, brilliant concept, But anyway, neither here nor there. You just kind of reminded me when you said that yeah, he did have that thought that this could be, done again, and Angela Lansbury could still be a part of it without having to be the main thrust of the show. But neither here nor there. So final question to you, I promise. Okay. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind leaving us with a bit of a teaser as to what comes next for Jessica, and for you, assuming that that's not the only thing you have in the pipeline, is more Jessica Fletcher.
Okay, so I am very excited about the next book. The next book, Jessica goes to Northern Ireland. And the reason she goes to Northern Ireland is in the TV series, we were used to her going to Ireland. To my knowledge, and I shouldn't say to my knowledge, I own all the DVDs and have for years. She mostly was in the Republic. She was never in the North. Dawn had her in England and Scotland a lot.
Right.
But I really didn't find anything in the books where Ireland was important. And yet it was important, obviously, to Jessica and clearly to Angela. She owned a house there and all that. So I decided I would send her to Northern Ireland because she'd never been there. And she's going to go to Belfast, Northern Ireland, because a friend of hers who is getting an award an American author is getting the American Author Award, breaks her leg, and Jessica is going to fill in. And then her neighbor next door, Baen, whose family comes from Bushmills, where the brewery is, asks Jessica to bring some stuff home to her cousins. And Jessica goes to Belfast, which is magnificent. That's where the Titanic Museum is. There's a lot to see there, and we do a little geography. And then she goes to Bushmills, but she does, she visits places that are very famous, like Giant's Causeway, Fairhead, things of that nature. So you do get a sense of the geography. And there is a murder, and she does solve the murder, but this is also not Jessica's family, it's Maeve O'Bannon's family, but there's a lot of family interaction here. I seem to, for the last couple of books, get myself into all this family stuff. I don't know, it might be the grandchildren, I'll have to say. So that's what's going to happen next. What I'm planning for after that, pending contracts, because Universal and Penguin Random House are negotiating now. She's going to come back to Cabot Cove, and we'll have a little Cabot Cove story. And the editor of the newspaper, who left to retire, came back to visit an old friend, and there's a murder, and what can I tell you, dead people, they just pop up. So that's kind of where I am. I've gotten a lot of requests for Western Canada. So I have to kind of look at that area, which I'm not familiar with as much, and see if I can come up with, you can put a story any place. You need Jessica and a dead body.
Right.
So I could take, like you say, I could put them in my kitchen. Jessica and a dead body, and you have a story. But for this series, the geography is very important to the readers, and different places. People have their favorites. They also Cabot Cove. When I wrote the first book in South Carolina, I got a number of emails from people who told me they were in love with this one certain character, not romantically, but
right.
This one character. And they wanted Jessica to go back so they could find out what happened to this person afterwards. And I was like, oh my God, it's not that kind of series, eventually we may go back and visit, who knows? I don't know how long I'll be writing these books. And again, it's 2 a year, so it's a heavy, that's why I work every day.
Sure.
The last thing I wrote, in between the first 2 books, I wrote 1 short story.
Right.
Since then, with family obligations, cleaning my house, and writing, I kind of committed for these 2 years that it would just be Jessica Fletcher.
Sure.
And then I'll see. And then if Universal changes and decides they only want 1 a year, because they're pulling the strings here, I have nothing to say about it. We'll have to see. I have a few good years left, hopefully, and we'll see where that goes. So that's it. Is there anything else?
No, that's fabulous. So, that book will be out in like 6 months, 2 a year. It goes quickly. But in the meantime, people have new entries in the Murder, She Wrote series to enjoy by Terrie Farley Moran. Terrie, thank you so much for being here. My apologies for keeping you from your pudding, but it was such a thrill to talk to you and share our love of Murder, She Wrote.
Well, any Doreen Sheridan recipe is always a good recipe. She picks the best one. She's really good. So thank you very much. I enjoyed being here. I really did.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.